Hello, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Livestock series webinar today. Today, our webinar is hosted by Livestock Malaysia with co-hosted and organized by the World Veterinary Poultry Association or WVPA. Our speakers today is Mr. Mark Allen. He is the Global Technical Service at Lohmann, and he is going to talk about an introduction to cage-free egg productions. So in order to save time, I would like to invite Dr. Vivian. She is our moderator for today to start the webinar. So Dr. Vivian, hi.
Thanks, June. Hello and welcome, everyone. First of all, happy World Poultry Day. We couldn't think of a better day for hosting this webinar. So thank you for joining us. My name is Vivian from WVPA Malaysia as the moderator for today. As cage-free egg market is experiencing steadying growth, we are honored to have Mr. Mark Allen here with us to present about the topic and introduction to cage-free egg production. Our presenter here today has started his career from the ground by collecting eggs on a cold, wet Welsh hill farm, which gave an insight into cage-free production. From there, he has had many experiences, like working with UK's largest independent integrator as consultant, and also by working closely with large veterinary practice to help develop and expand their poultry division. Today, Mr. Mark is currently working as a global technical service under Lohmann Breeders since October 2018, with a focus on cage-free. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. A recorded version of this webinar will be available for replay in YouTube, Facebook, and our Livestock website. And we would like to hear from you as well. Please feel free to drop any questions at the chat box, and we will address them by the end of the webinar. With that, the screen is yours, Mark.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody from the United Kingdom. And first, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to speak at this event. And I'm hoping you will find some of what I say quite interesting, if not a lot. So without further ado, let me try and get going. And okay, let me move this out of the way. Okay. So I'd like to talk, it's an introduction to cage-free production, and it's a very big topic. So I just like to touch on a few of the main pointers I can. But I think with anything, it's always best to start with a little bit of history. So what is cage-free? Is this really a true representation of what people imagine and what cage-free actually is? Or is it this, where we see a modern aviary system indoors? Cage-free can encompass many different types of animal husbandry. So basically, we can have aviary systems, barn systems, free-range systems, pasture, free-run. There's so many different names out there. It all becomes a little bit confusing. But the truth is they all come under this banner of cage-free. Now, in the United Kingdom, we've been producing cage-free commercially on a commercial scale for around 30 years. Now, this is difficult because we like to raise the chickens like this. In England, we're known for our poor weather conditions, but this is our preferred choice of production. But the problem we have is our egg has to look like this, because here we can't wash the egg like we can in some countries and sell it as a Class A egg. So we have to put a strong emphasis on management. Okay, just a little bit of history of how we got here in the UK. So back in 1957, this is when we started our first egg marketing board. And this was just to bring some regulations in because the egg industry was growing, so we needed some kind of control. And around 1996, this was growing, but we're only around 10% of free range. The first retailer to end the sale of cage shell egg, now not egg products, this is just shell egg, was back in 1997, so a long time ago. And this was around the time that in Europe, they were recognizing animals as sentient beings. So welfare was suddenly growing. So people were concerned about how we were farming these animals and how we're treating them. So in 1998, the rebirth of the Lions scheme. Now, this was a regulatory body, which many of you may have heard of. It's so good for us. It promotes our egg and it controls ours and kind of sets us apart in the market. Then came a directive to ban the conventional cages coming forward in 2012. So everyone started panicking what we were going to do. The free range market continued to grow and we were around 32% around that time. And then this is soon after the Happy Egg launched, and that became the largest UK free range brand. And we saw how powerful marketing was of when we put out the right message to the customers of what we were trying to sell to them. Happy Egg is now in the US and it's one of the largest global free range brands. So I'll unmute. I'm not sure if I'm now unmuted. It says the host muted me. I'll continue. Okay, so in 2012, the cage ban came into the force. So all the cages were to be replaced with enriched colony. So we went from and there's nothing wrong with cage systems, don't get me wrong. I'm sorry if I upset anyone. The birds produce well. So we had to grow the cage size to up to 750 square centimeters per hen. And basically, plus the addition in there, we had to put a nest area, scratch mats, and perch bars. But like anything, it doesn't stop there. As we said with the welfare, people start looking where their food comes from. And then they start questioning production methods. And unfortunately, a lot of the consumers, particularly now with social media, can be easily influenced about what they see, and it's not always the truth. And we saw this. So they started putting pressure on the retailers and consumer demand. And in fact, I remember it was a 12-year-old girl who started a petition and all the newspapers picked up on this, and this kind of pushed this move even quicker. So inevitably, we all moved to the next step, which was cage-free. And then we've all heard about this 100% commitment by 2025. So where are we today? In the UK market, we have a flock size of around 42 million laying hens. And if we break that down into systems, we can see here our cage-free market, 67, 68. We put our organic market within the free range. Now this is Kantar data, some of the other data varies, but we're around 65 to 70% cage-free at the moment. Now if we bring this out a little bit into Europe, we have an EU flock size of 413 million laying hens. We see the breakup there. So we've got around 52% in the cage-free. But what we notice here is the free-range market is quite small. Yes, we have some Scandinavian countries that are more free-range, but the general consensus and the general movement are for this barn for the cage-free. And this is the problem we have in the UK. We have a very small, it's now probably around 2%, I think now. But our consumers don't understand the cage-free. So this cage-free revolution, we don't understand it because we moved straight into the higher free range. We've now got a problem where how do we market a barn egg? Because our consumers see that as a lower welfare egg. So now we're in the process of creating and promoting new marketing strategies where we need to grow this area. So higher welfare barn and everything. So we're constantly playing this battle. Now, this isn't a European thing or a United Kingdom thing. This is a global movement. And let's be honest, looking around the world, predominantly, mostly cages still, I think over 80% cages around there. Yet we're still seeing this global cage-free commitment that everyone wants to do by 2025, which is, you know, in a few years, it's ridiculous. But this is being pushed a lot by the welfare. And you may have seen the Compassion in World Farming, their egg track report. So anyone that says, yes, we will go cage free, they will put you in this report. They will report on you. How far are you getting? Are you sticking to your promises? Because they're determined to turn the world 100% cage free. Will this happen? In my opinion, no. And I don't want it to happen, being honest, because I remember the days when we had a cage egg, a barn egg, a free range egg, an organic egg. And in the markets, we need these levels. We need this competition. If all egg is the same, then it just becomes a commodity. So we have issues there. And this is an example in America where they say for 100%. And yes, some individual companies will go 100%. But as a whole, a lot of people I talk to say you'll probably get to around 55 or 60% in reality. Now, this was a quick survey. This was on farmers around, I think it was from 2017, about what's pushing them to cage free. And I think we can clearly see that it's a customer. So the customer demand and the consumer sentiment, and then there's a high welfare presence there. So like I said before, the consumers are now looking at where this food comes from and where they're going to buy it from. And what happens is the consumers put pressure onto the retailers, so then the retailers will put pressure onto the farmers to increase this welfare, and it escalates and escalates and escalates. And what drives this? If we look in some places in South America, for example, where cage-free is growing, some of the younger people now have a little bit more disposable income. And when you get this disposable income, that gives you the privilege really to be able to look at this higher welfare, but it comes at a cost. So therefore, with farmers as well, when you're producing this higher welfare egg, we need to make sure you get the returns, because obviously there's an increase in cost for you. And the welfare brings a whole new level of regulations for us. Here in the UK, we have the RSPCA and the laying hen welfare. And I've seen this has now been adopted by many countries as a guideline. So we seem to be jumping from here to here very quickly. And the welfare regulations are based on the 5 freedoms. And believe you me, this is a big book just based on 5 freedoms. And they're the basic freedoms from hunger and thirst, discomfort, pain, injury, disease, fear, distress. And like I say, the regulations in there are, I can show you, or you can go and find the book. There's a lot of rules and regulations we have to adhere to. And this bit is interesting because it's the freedom to express normal behavior, because that is what cage-free management is all about. We're allowing a larger expression of normal behaviors from the hens. But just briefly, just the last bit on the legislation, because that also determines for us what is cage-free. And we need to remember this when we're moving into this new cage-free world. Because a cage-free egg sold here, for example, in America, would not be classed as a cage-free egg here, down to the rules and regulations. And so the legislation is generally driven by local government. And here we have DEFRA. And we also, even though United Kingdom is now not in the EU, we still abide by the rules where on every farm there, on every egg, we basically have to record what type of system it is, organic, free range, etc., the country of origin, the farm ID. And we moved, I can't remember when, a few years ago, we used to stamp the eggs in the packing station. Now in the UK, we have to stamp on farm. So every consumer can buy an egg, look at that code, trace it back to the farm. Creates a lot of problems with welfare when some of the welfare people can then find out where these farms are and go and visit, but that's another story. The best before date, and like I mentioned before, the line egg. So basically we have strict salmonella, strict vaccination protocols, and again, a whole new raft of regulation on top of all the others. And we see more and more retailer legislation. And I know it's the retailers driving all of this in many parts of the world, but with lots of retailers competing, and rightly so. They want to make their egg a little bit different to someone else's. So they then will include more and more regulations. I remember on one of my farms, I was having regularly 17, 20 audits all the way through. So, cage-free management. So I've been talking all week, so I'm hoping my voice keeps. So basically, for cage-free management, we basically throw away the chicken rule book, because from here we need to follow the hens. We need to understand the hens more. It's not what we decide, it's what the hens want us to do. Because as we move from each step, from cage to cage-free to free range, we see an increase in this natural behavior dominance. And it's through us understanding the behaviors, we can still manage them. I mean, this is a picture of a parent flock on a free range system, and we're seeing more and more of these now, and we can still manage them. We still achieve excellent results. Why is this? So what am I talking about? Basically, if we look at a cage system, the influence of management, we have to provide feed, we provide a nice environment, and we generally will have a good level of high biosecurity. And we see natural behaviors in any hen. Hens in cages dust bathe, they wing stretch. This is what pushed the enriched cages, the enriched colonies, to give them more space, because we see them doing this. So in these systems, we need monitoring protocols and a basic awareness of animal behavior to monitor these. So the management really, in comparison, is quite small, apart from when we move then to an aviary system. We need to train the birds. We have an influence of the system, humans, because we interact with the hen more. Biosecurity pressure, because obviously we're increasing exposure to contaminants. And then we see these natural behavior expression, it dominates. So they start exhibiting what they're designed to do. So we need strategic, active management. So therefore, we see the influence of management increase. Then when we do the crazy thing like we do in the UK, where we let them outside, the biosecurity, as much as we can, is reduced because they're exposed to the elements. Everything, all the risk factors are increased. And we see an additional influence of natural expression. You know, these hens want to be outside, the jungle fowl, they want to be out there. So we need to understand positive and negative influence. So we need proactive management. So we can see there, this is what we're saying about its natural behavior. The influence of management grows as we go through the systems. So people always ask me, what is the number one investment in cage-free systems? The equipment, is it this, is it that? No, it's people. Because we need farmers, we need stockmanship. Yeah, we need people who can understand and hear the hens and listen to the hens and adapt. This is what we need, the training for the people. Because basically we learn from the hens, we listen to them. I walk into a shed, I may be talking to you, but I'm listening to your hens, because they will tell us, even before we've gone in, what's going on. And our message is always clear. Everything starts here in rear. And that is regardless of system. We're talking cage-free now, but this is for any system, cage system, anything. Everything begins here. Now, for cage-free, the basics always remain the same, like we say. So all your standard settings we use for the environment, the feed, checking the chicks, light intensity, walk, everything. All of those basic factors always remain the same. Now, the difference is the repercussions from getting some of these wrong will be much higher in the cage-free systems. And we have to understand this, because genetically, the birds, like any creature, the bird is there, it will develop, it will grow, it will do what it needs to do, in this case, reproduce. And it's down later, so from 40 weeks onwards, that we will then start to see the issues of what we did wrong here, generally. So we need to focus on these areas a little bit more. Because we need to remember that we are now the mother hen. When we have natural behavior, we have the mother hen, we are the mother hen. And from day one, we're influencing the immune system through the environmental conditions we supply. I do talks on rearing and how we set up, and people talk about the house, the facility. It's not the facility. we want, because we're talking about the chick's microclimate. It's not the house temperature, it's the chick's temperature. Everything is about the chick. And development, we influence development. Many of you have probably seen this, the stages of development we go through, all as important as the next, and we generally, that's closely associated with feed, as the nutritionist will always talk about. But also we need to, and this is one of the things, even here in the UK, where we've been doing it for so long, when I go on farm and people don't have body weights and uniformity, this is our picture. This is what lets us know. We can't see inside the hen. So this is what lets us know what's happening. And from these, it's the body weight and the uniformity that drive any changes in the feed. When we see feed programs where at this age I'm changing to this, at this age I'm changing to that. No, I'm sorry, it's the hen and the chick that will tell us when we need to change that ration. Now, talking with cage-free, we also influence behavior through what we call imprinting. I have to watch the time. I've got a lot to get through and I like to talk. Just an example, positively directed pecking. You learn day 10 is a critical age for learning positively directed pecking behavior, because when you hear people talk about feather pecking, all it is misdirected foraging behavior. It's allopreening behavior, birds preen. And if we don't train them to do it in the right places, we can then see the issues, which we do a lot in rear. Exposure to enrichment in the first 3 weeks, it basically sets behavioral responses. Again, another topic entirely. In those first 3 weeks, we see a lot of brain movement, development of dominance, shifting into a passive side and an inquisitive side. So we're setting those responses, and in cage-free, this is very important. And we know early perching improves spatial performance. So if we're going into aviary systems, what do we need? We need a hen to be able to use the system, obviously. And the earlier we're exposed to perching, the better adapted they will be. And also access to perching significantly reduces the risk of injurious pecking. Why? Because basically they're exhibiting their natural behavior back outside in that tree. And it also reduces the tendency to lay the first floor eggs. A lot of new research on all of these things coming out. For me, it's pretty much common sense. If we have a hen that can use the system and moves, it's more likely to get into those nest boxes. So, but throughout rear, there are so many behavioral influences we need to be aware of. And I don't have time today to talk about all of these, but I just want to give you an example of how many we have. So we look here from 0 to day 1, 2, 3, into the week, we can see from day 1 influence the immune system, pecking behavior, perching, spatial awareness, feed training we need to get done. The development of body weight at 5 weeks and production at 72 weeks, already we're influencing production statistics later on. Egg mass, and all the while where we're developing the organs and the skeletal development. Then we need another crucial period, which a lot of people we seem to miss. And in cage-free, we need to intake development. We need to make sure we've got all these organs working as they should and developing as they should. And throughout this time, we need to look at active enrichment. I'll briefly touch on enrichment later, but basically we see a lot now, people talk about enrichment, we use it a lot. There's a big difference between just putting an item there and walking away and going, I've given the hens enrichment, which we see in a lot of cases. That's not active. That doesn't, we're not supplying the enrichment that the hen needs at that time. We move on to the next stage. We've then got the influence of uniformity. We've got transfer, stimulation, and one of the most important periods, a transition period. It's a cage-free system. So we're training the hen there. We need to move it. We need to give it time to get used to that system. We cannot put it in there. When you're moving house, it takes you a little bit of time to get used to where the light switches are, where everything is. So you need a bit of time to adapt to that. And then we go into puberty. This is a period we generally tend to miss because it's another huge stress period. So we're basically building these blocks to cope with all of these stresses. And that's a big period for body weight and uniformity. Then we have social and productive stress as it goes into production, and then a lot of active enrichment. So like I say, enrichment is important. And again, I'm just generalizing over these topics because this is just an introduction, so I won't go too deep into them. But in any cage-free system, it's important. Reduces boredom, promotes positive foraging behavior, and it helps create movement. So like I said, we start in rear. Like, you know, we can see now more science coming out from this. I've been doing it, you know, for many years, but now at least, you know, we can see the science now backing up what I've been doing, because it helps them develop their exploring behavior. And like I say, strategic enrichment. And there's so many different types we can use. Everything is an enrichment. When we feed them is an enrichment. And we can provide hay bales, simple things like buckets, stones, the litter material, lots and lots of options and ideas. And now we see a lot of these big companies who sell things like these pecking blocks. And all of these are basically now inside, they have probiotics and prebiotics. So the idea is there's a reward. So they started with flavors, with aniseed and things like that. Now there's a reward for it. So in many countries, welfare legislation now dictates the control of movement and enrichment. For example, here in the UK, now what generally happens is we start doing something, we have a problem, we try and solve that problem, we then work with the welfare businesses, they then put it as an idea, it then becomes into legislation when we start to see the benefits. Now, I say to all of you guys that are just getting into cage-free maybe that, you know, learn from our mistakes. I've made so many mistakes over the years. You can jump all of those and just take what we've learnt. So in rearing now, we have to provide purchase before 10 days because we've seen the benefit. If we've got raised tiers, it has to be by 15 days. We have to provide, this is a guideline because in rear, I'm not providing additional foraging material every other day, sorry everyone, because that's unnecessary. But it's a guideline. As long as we're being active, then, and we can show that we're being active, then that's fine. And in rearing and production, 2 items per 1,000 birds internally, and 1 area per 2,000 birds externally. And outside, we need a minimum of 5% natural cover. So this is just showing how it soon becomes legislation. So now I just want to jump back to a traditional rearing period, because we said there's all these influences going on. Okay, so generally we call it a starter, a grower, and a development period. And this is traditionally what we all call rear. But we need to remember, like we saw before, there's actually a 4th stage, and we can call it what we want. I call it a transition period. So we know in these first 3 areas, we know we always focus on the growth and development of those, but it's also happening in this transition period, which is, as we say, as we go through puberty, the changes are still going on internally in this hen. It's still growing. We also have additional stresses of adaptation stress. So we're saying, okay, now we want you to get ready to start producing, but we're also going to throw a lot of extra stress at you as well. And then we move into the production stress. So it's a constant challenge and we're throwing everything. So really we need to start thinking that the end of the rearing period is around 30 weeks. Now, and therefore, like we said before, we have to consider the influence of imprinting and training. That goes from day 1 all the way to the end of the training period, which I generally is around week 32. I think after week 32, trying to get a hen to do something different, we're going to struggle. They're set in their ways. You know, we might have an issue with that. So now what we do now for cage-free is forget your traditional rearing period. We want to call this a preparation period. We're preparing the hen to go into the period that makes us the money, basically, when it lays an egg. So just taking that preparation period as well, we also need to consider the system we're going to use in production. It could be a simple floor system built in a barn with some nests and some feeders, or we could use a nice aviary system. This picture is quite interesting because we see here in the UK, we went from tall systems now to small systems, and now they're opening up even more. So we can basically, for welfare, you can see the hens, we can do them because it's all about visual eye lines now. So for rear and production, we need to try and make sure they fit together, because what we don't want to be doing is basically putting them on the floor with no enrichments, no levels, nothing like that, a flat floor, and then moving them in that high stress period into that aviary system. We will get problems. So we need to closely match the systems and equipment to ensure an easy and fast adaptation. Now, if there's any equipment people listening, I'm sorry, I'm going to upset you slightly. I underline closely, because in an ideal world, if we have a manufacturer A aviary rearing system and a manufacturer A production system together, perfect. But unfortunately, that's not the real world. And for example, here in the UK, we obviously have a lot of aviary production, but in rear, we don't use aviary rear. What we do is we adapt the systems in there to get as close as we can. Because movement is key in these cage-free, logically, the hens are moving. And ourselves, so even in a floor system, whichever type of system you have, we're adopting and implementing movement behavior. So here, even as we walk, we see the hens will move. So they'll come off the slats, they're moving under there. Now, this is positive as long as we're very careful, because what we don't want to do is encourage piling. So we have to pay attention to what we're doing. But the more time we spend with these hens and we're getting them used to the human fear response, is nice and relaxed, and we're getting that movement. Everything's good. In an aviary system, if we're moving into aviary production, we don't just need the movement there and there, we basically need it everywhere. Now, this becomes a problem because people start to panic about aviary systems, and they then tend to overcomplicate everything because they're so key and so precise on everything. And I just say to them, okay, what you need to do, it's a metal tree. That's all it is, a tree made out of metal. That's all you've got to imagine. And all they are, they're just the branches. So imagine what they will do before and what they do in the daytime, the nighttime, when we have lighting programs. Picture a metal tree in your head, and that will basically hopefully make it a little bit simpler within those aviary systems. Now, like we said before, many modern systems understand the necessity for perching, movement, everything else, so they can develop them and they design them with all of this. But like we said, not everyone can have these modern facilities. But we need to make sure then, if we haven't got a system like that, we have got the basics. So we have got raised slats, we have got perching. And we know that the more complex we make it, the better it is for their behavioral and movement development. Again, a little bit of science in there. I talk a lot. I like to throw a bit of science in so people just don't think I'm just talking crazy things out of my head. So in this system, we can see we have the adjustable slats at the back there. Now, it's quite good. See, these just tilt. They don't lift in that one. And what happens is the hens get used to that motion of upwards and downwards movement, and then they also develop the perching behavior on the end. So we kind of get two benefits from a system like that. And in this one, a simple winch system we have that basically we can move everything up and down. So like I say, just to summarize, a nice aviary rearing system is the best. If we haven't got those, then let's at least make it as like that aviary system as we can. So feed. In cage-free systems, how we feed the hen becomes just as important as what we feed them. The basics, like everything, I like the basics. The basics apply to any system. We use the highest quality feed we can. Of course, we let development and body weight dictate the ration changes. And we need to make sure we meet the daily nutritional needs of the hen. Now, I say daily because logically now we have additional energy demands. What we're feeding them there, well, if I'm sitting here and what I eat and what I use for this past year, I've been stuck at home, so it's different to how I will use that food and that energy as I'm out and about on farm, etc. And we get additional feed competition. Now, what I mean about this is when we have good movement in a cage-free system where they're using the whole of the premises, so the floor, the systems, they're moving. If we train them right for everything, when it's feeding time, they want to come and feed together. So therefore, we can get this competition. So we need to make sure we're meeting the daily needs of every single hen within that system. So to do that, just to get into our heads, what we need to do is we need to meet the anticipatory feeding behaviors. What do I mean? Okay, quite simply, day and night. If we look at what a hen naturally wants to do, a third in the morning, 2/3 in the afternoon, or some people say 40%, 60%. Yeah, they'll eat more later in the day. Now, why do they do this? Because there's an anticipatory feeding behavior at the end of the day. And it's the technical terms of pre-scoto period. For me, I'm very simple. It's before they go to bed. It's the nighttime feed. This is important. Here's the stomach. This is the true stomach, so we say. So the gizzard and proventriculus, what they need to do, and naturally what they know they want to do at night, is to fill that up. Because then they're going to go and you know, they're going through oviposition, they're going to lay an egg. So the demand over nighttime, they still need a lot of energy when they're asleep, because inside it's like a little factory going off and working. So the demand for calcium increases dramatically, and the energy demand, 60 to 70% of the energy is still going to come from that feed, so they can keep this factory working overnight, which is what we need them to do. Then we get the pre-photo period, so basically in the morning, where whatever system they're in, they'll have a nice breakfast and they'll go about their daily business. And they're the anticipatory feeding behavior. So we need to make sure we're supplying that. But the problem we've got is hens are obviously efficient natural foragers. When we talk about pecking or anything, it's foraging behavior, because they know what they need, which is why they're very selective eaters. They know what they need for maintenance. They know what they need for grist to grind the food. They know what they need to keep them going. Like any animals, it's going to search out what it needs. And don't just think I'm talking about free range systems, because inside on the floor, they're going to forage. And if there's an ability to find things that suit their needs on the floor, for example, spilt feed or anything like this, they will go and forage and pick on that food and take exactly what they want. So our job is we not only need to train them to eat and drink in the house, but we also have to control what we give them in that track. Because like we say, being selective eaters, what they'll do is they'll go out and pick the nice bits. Like me, I will go and pick the nice chocolate bars, and I like my eggs and I will take them. But at the bottom, where we have the important bits, so all the salts, the amino acids, the bits that we know they need to keep them functioning correctly and efficiently, that's always going to sit in the bottom. Being honest, that's in the feed, that's also the expensive bit as well. So we need to make sure we're making sure they get that balance of feed. So that means feed stimulation, and this accounts to rear end production. Now, feed stimulation, when we talk about this, is because we do not restrict feed. We should never restrict feed. what we should be talking about is promoting feed intake in rear, and throughout rear and production is reducing the ability to selectively feed. You know, yes, we all know what we want our hens to eat, but ultimately I want my hen to eat and produce. Yeah, so we need to get that balance right. So we should never restrict. A hen's not just going to, if we reduce the ability to selectively feed and we've trained the hen and it's developed properly, it will eat what it needs and then it will go and do its business. It's not going to sit around there and just having a snack all day. So just a rough idea, and this isn't exact. If we look here, so generally in rear, we start with a manual feeding, depending, floor, aviary, whatever. By around 2 weeks, normally, again, this is just generalizing, this isn't fixed, depending on your system and everything else. By 2 weeks, roughly, I'll be on an automatic feeding program in my facility. And generally what I do is I'll have 2 feeds in the morning, then I'll have 1 later on. So I'm normally around 3 feeds. I have a big gap in the day between those. And then what happens is I let the appetite and the development of that hen drive the additional feeding. Again, when we see in places feeding programs and I give them 4 feeds here, and on week 3, I give them another feed. On week 8, I give them another feed. No, the hens, again, if we're conscious of what we're doing and we watch the hens, because remember, this is important for us, this development here. So we let the hens and the appetite development drive that additional feeding. So by 7 to 8 weeks in my rearing facility, my tracks are empty at least once a day. So we can see here, empty is subjective. Again, another topic. Because what I may call empty, you may not call empty. And again, with stockmanship, we can hear the birds. So we don't want them hungry, but we don't want to, we want to make sure they're getting low. And the reason I try and get that ready for around 7 to 8 weeks, it might be 8 to 9 weeks, that's fine, is because we want to be ready when we start promoting the feed intake capacity, because that's very, very important in cage-free systems. So from around week 11 onwards to 16, as we're developing that capacity, if we've already got it set up there, we find that bit a lot easier. And what we need to remember is feeding is a balancing act. Oh, conscious of the time, best speed up. So we need to always keep that balance of feed full and empty, full and empty. Like you say, they're naturally selective eaters. So it's an active management. Feeding in cage-free is not something we set and walk away from. It's an active management. So we watch, we monitor, we change, we adapt. And we need to remember as well that feeding is cyclical. So what is left at the end of the day here, we start the day with here. So the problem is if we're not active and managing it, because we just stick to this program, we don't look, we can end up with overfull first thing. The feeders run again, and all we do is top up, and then we get the same problems we saw before, where all the hens are doing is selectively feeding from that top part of the feed. Okay, environment. So I'll speed up, jump a few maybe. So in cage-free systems, we're still in control for the environment. We can't control the external environment. I can't control the weather. I can't control the light from the sun. I can't do it. So closed houses, though, allow us to create our own microclimate or our own micro world, if you say, obviously enclosed. So we can control lighting for movement and to move the hens around. We can control the air that enters in, so we can control the wind speed in there. We can speed it up, slow it down. We've got everything at our control. A lot of places now, they change their ventilation systems for positive pressure. So we pull air in, hot air in, and blow it down. For you guys in a hot climate, really it's more about air movement needs to be the focus in a hot climate. We could also, if we need to, we can also, I don't know what's happened, there we go. We could also make it warmer, and we could also make it colder in that system. But as soon as we open the doors for free range systems, everything changes. So our microclimate, our micro world comes under attack. So we need to manage it correctly. So where we were controlling the wind speed and the internal air movement, here now it's open. Even an 9 mile an hour wind basically will equate to a 4 meters a second wind speed internally. So we're in danger of chilling those hens. So we have to be careful and control that. We might make a balanced 25 lux or whatever we're aiming for in our system inside. But when we open the doors outside, it could be anything like 100,000 lux. And when we get cloudy days and it changes. So just inside the house there where it's open as the sun's coming in. I mean, I know you guys with open systems, you know this already, but we can get this variation in light intensity. And then this inside the system creates these blocks of light. And as we know, hens are drawn to light, but it can also draw them away. So it can attract and detract. So we've carefully trained them for movement in their system. And then all of these things are then making it more difficult and interfering with all of our previous training. So opening the pop holes also brings other challenges. So the cold damp area affects the quality of the litter and the scratch area. It becomes a high activity area. High activity areas are areas where a lot of hens congregate and meet together. And that can be positive because it's nice movement, but it can also be negative as well. And when we open them, obviously, it's an easy access area for rodents and parasites. And any system, a cage-free or a free range, we're exposing to the floor, so we carry that additional health risk. So in here, we get the bacterial build-up, disease transference, because there's a disease and they pass it out and the hens come and peck. So we get this foam-like transmission and parasites. Unfortunately, technological issues mean my videos don't work, so I quickly adjusted this one this morning. Here in the UK, we have a lot of cold, damp air that comes in through these systems. So what basically happens, if we look here, is the top surface, if we don't manage it correctly, it can become hard, like a cap on top. So we'll get the floor, could be concrete, could be soil. Then we get the hard coating on top. And what basically happens is inside, we get this bacteria build up. Then the hens come, they start pecking away, they break that seal, then all of a sudden, boof, we've launched all this bacterial soup out into the air, all these viral challenges and all these issues. So we need to maintain this area as well. It's quite easy, we can work it. One of the simplest ways is just walking. Every time you walk, shuffle your feet, move it around. You see the hens then follow behind you and get in and scratch it as well. Throw a little bit of grip down, that gets them scratching everything. Rake it, break it into compartments and keep it regularly so it's not as daunting, as big a job as you need to do. An hour a day for someone, that's all. And enrichment also encourages floor scratching because as we can see here, as you go to the enrichment article, the feet are moving, they're scratching at the floor and they're going. Parasites, as we know, I've added this because people always ask me, we know the effect, everything from production, egg quality, mortality, body weight, a huge impact of contamination. And that can be brought in by anything. We can carry this problem in. It can come on equipment, clothing, vehicles, the rodents, anything like that. So we need to break the cycle. So the best advice I can give on parasite control is know your enemy. Simple as that. Identify the most common issue on your site and in your area. Because once you've identified it, you can understand it. So therefore, you can look at pre-patent periods, you can look at the development of egg and infectious periods. So then when you treat, you can treat effectively. So many times we look and we can treat for these things. Here, a popular thing in the UK for worms is to treat every 6 to 8 weeks. That's fine, but you're not actually breaking the cycle if you've got a roundworm problem, for example. All you're doing is spending a lot of money on a product. Sorry, people, but we need to be effective. I might just go slightly over, that's okay. I'll keep going, and if someone wants to shout at me to stop. Just a little bit, a couple of slides, a few slides just on the outdoors for those that are looking at free range, because before we let them loose, we need to train them. Because as we said before, the natural behavior is always dominant and we know what the hen would prefer. And we also have to train them to come back in, because inside is where we want them to eat, to drink and to lay those eggs. We don't want them laying out there. So the first step is we get the hens sleeping in the system. Usually takes maximum of 5 to 7 days in an aviary system. Floor systems, obviously a lot easier. And once we've got them trained, only then will we start opening the pop holes outside. And what I generally do is I open them, if I have a large gap of feeding, always feed a hen, same in an aviary rear, always feed them before you release them to the floor. So basically, if you have any problems, at least you've got a lot of food in there, so they're not going to go hungry. And in the UK, we have to give them full access to the range by 3 weeks after housing. For me, it takes around 2 weeks of full range training because I break it up slowly. And what we do is, in a lot of farms here, they'll have an additional area just outside. So it's a wire floor on a wooden frame, because this is a high activity area in any system, because the hens like to congregate here in a free range system as they start coming back in at night. You know, it's like when you're a child and, you know, you can come home as long as you play outside the home and don't go too far. This is the same there. And the problem is when it's there, there's a lot of pecking, there's a lot of pooing, there's a lot of bacteria and mash kind of going on. So we end up with that bacterial soup again. So when we have this off the ground here, it offers a bit of bacterial protection, rodent protection, because we can bait under there. So the hens aren't going to get to the baits, but any rodent trying to get in is going to go to the bait first. And it also sounds silly, but it acts as a doormat. So the hens can wipe their feet as they're hanging around there on the wires or they're scratching around. So they hopefully don't then carry too much of the mud and rubbish from outside into the area inside. And it's a training aid. So like I say, what we generally do is we have a movable fence. And what we'll do, this is the outside area for those first 7 days. So I've trained them in the system to go in and out. Then for the first 7 days, this is as far as they go. Then I train them to go out there and I train them to come in and in the system. That takes around 7 days. The next 7 days, not everybody does this. This is an idea. You can use paddocks, which is, I call like the second runway. So for 7 days, generally they're normally around 30 meters long, 4 to 5 meters wide. Doesn't matter. 6 meters, 10 meters, it's fine. Doesn't matter. It's broken into different sections. We have a temporary fence at the end of it, and you see why, because basically what we can do is when we start to release those hens, we can move sections at a time. So we can let them out of that one, let them out of that one. So what that does, it helps protect the whole of that land becoming foul sick, because we're channeling down one area and down one area. So every 6 weeks or so, we'll move to another area. And it allows for reseeding if you're doing that. And it also helps for parasite control. And then we have full access onto the range. In the UK, we have the regulations of 2,000 birds per hectare. There we have the perimeter fence has to be no more than 350 meters away. A lot of sites will have trees, and you see a lot of retailers dictating the planting rules now. They have been for some time. McDonald's have, Tesco have, all of these for where we put the trees. And we also have enrichment externally by legislation, one area for 2,000 hens. Shades are an essential part of free range management outside. And you can use anything. It doesn't have to be an expensive shade. You can knock something together with bits you can find, old trailers, bits of wood, anything. It provides essential cover from overhead predators, protection from the elements, and can be used to divert and direct movement. For example, here we have a shed. So on this flock, perhaps if they're not moving out and we want to kind of direct them where we want them to be, we can put a shade close to the unit. Then what we can do is either move that or put another one a little bit farther, and the hen will go from shade to shade where it feels more comfortable. And then we can direct that movement where we need it to go. Because contrary to what people believe, with free range hens, they don't like bright sun, they don't like the rain, they don't like the wind, they don't like it too cloudy. They generally like to go out when we want them to come home. That's normally the problem. And then we move it to there. And I think I'm nearly there. Sorry, 5 minutes over. So the training continues when we want the hens to return to the house. So what happens is it starts getting dark. Off they come. They start heading back into towards the house. So you can see it again, it comes in, it's getting dark outside, generally hover around this area. Then as it gets a little bit darker, it notices the light that's inside the shed. So it'll walk closer to the shed. And then basically, then as the lights in there go out in the litter area, it pulls the hen inside. So we're using that light movement in stages to basically control the hen. There are other things we can use, such as bells and everything, but again, another big topic. And just to finish up, for cage-free, monitoring programs are vital. Keep them simple and make them bespoke, make them fit your system. I'm not going to make you a monitoring program. You know the basics, what we need to cover: water and feed consumption. Crop fill is not just for rearing. Every flock I go and see, I check the crops, whatever age it is, and match it to the feeding program. Body weight, uniformity, temperature, feed, whatever is important, you can make your own. But monitoring is key. It's the only way we can recognize and solve these issues. So finally, the 8 laws of cage-free management, which is not true. It's actually Mark's 8 laws of cage-free management. Early training is vital preparation. Be ready to adapt. No 2 flocks are the same. Expect the unexpected. Then you won't be surprised. Listen and watch. Let the birds will tell you when happy, when they're not happy, when something is right and when something is wrong. Remember, every decision you make will have an effect on all the flock. So we don't think that, oh, they're doing really well, I'll change this, because some of the birds won't be doing as well, and we will in turn affect those as well. And don't overcomplicate things. I'm a very simple guy. I learned my craft by being on farm and working with the chickens, and I see sometimes we can make it so complicated by thinking too much. And biosecurity is essential. I didn't touch on that today because it's a huge topic, but with any system, biosecurity is key. And your number 1 investment is people. Train, prepare, and train. Sorry I went over time, but thank you. I think she's on mute. It's still on mute.
Hi, thank you for your great and fun presentation. We do have a few questions in store for you. The first question will be, how do we overcome salmonella, enteritidis, ticks and fleas issue in cage-free farming?
Vaccination. Basically, for anything like we say, we're exposing this hen into all of these challenging environments. And touch wood, in the UK, our salmonella level is very, very, very low. So work closely with your veterinarians. Your vaccination program is vital in cage-free systems, and alongside your biosecurity. Put the two together, the great programs, and that is how you will cope and how you will deal with those situations.
Okay, thank you. And for the second question, considering the tropical nature in Malaysia, what will be the impact of environment temperature on productivity?
Yeah, this is, we do a lot, because interestingly, a lot of the recent projects we're working on, South America, Asia, Africa, we've all got these different climates. So the focus really is water and air movement. So the focus is on ventilation systems. In a hot climate like there, we need to consider the humidity, we need to consider air movement. So whereas here, I can control my fans quite slowly, because I don't need to be constantly blowing air over the hens. In a hot climate, we need to constantly keep that air movement, because as a hen eats, it moves, it exerts energy, it exerts heat. So we need to keep this cooling process. And also water, because water and feed go hand in hand. Water is your problem, and keeping your water sources cool. So your water control program would be more of basically position of tanks. Can we cover them? Can we protect them? Can we insulate the pipes? So when we build a system, do we need to put them underground for cooling? And we need to flush that water system regularly, and it needs to be a regular weekly program for flushing that system.
Thank you for the key points. We also have a question about is cage-free egg production as efficient as caged egg production?
Yes, it can be. We automatically assume that, again, I have nothing against cage because cages, they produce well and we can keep the birds and we get some great results. We can achieve just as good results and we're seeing those results in these cage-free systems. So we needn't be scared and think we're going to lose. Okay, we might not be as productive, but we can get very, very close, if not equal to those production methods in the cage-free systems.
Okay. The next question is, in Asia countries, we usually have free-range village chickens, and do we consider these free-range village chickens as cage-free eggs production?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like we say, it gets so complicated, and the problem is it gets complicated for the consumer as well. So we have this image in our head, but cage-free covers everything. Cage-free means it's not in a cage. We have the problem now in the United Kingdom and in Europe where the welfare, every system has to be signed and approved by the welfare people. Now, on some systems, they won't approve them because they are too much like a cage. However, we can open the doors and have it as a cage-free. So it can be quite problematic. But yes, for me, anything, if we give a chicken the option to and some space to move, that is a cage-free chicken.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. And moving on to the questions from the chat box. Firstly, there are many ways of preventing feather pecking as well as cannibalism. In terms of nutrition, what will be a safe crude fiber percentage to prevent such a behavior in cage-free systems, especially when we are dealing with large flocks?
Fiber is always a big topic. And okay, for fiber, we will have people at 4%, 5%, some people even up at 6%. So we need to keep the high levels of fiber, and it's been proven to show that fiber is very beneficial. And I'll let the nutritionists explain more about that. But what we need to remember is the fiber is not just the sole solution or management practice for controlling feather pecking. Because, for example, we see many cases when we have a feather pecking outbreak, and what people then do is increase the fiber when we have this outbreak. And what we end up doing then is we satiate the hens. So we might reduce it, but we're never going to resolve the problem. So your fiber level should always match in with your management protocols as well.
Okay, so it comes both ways. And we have another question saying, Mark, great presentation. What is the optimal aviary and production system that can be used in hot and humid condition? How about the feeding program in these conditions? Is it 3 feeding time per day or 4?
First, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. Systems, okay, being honest, I'm very simple. And for me, the simpler the system, the better. So I grew up with basic floor systems, some feeders, some drinkers, and an S box. But I appreciate and understand that we do this commercially. And when I ran a commercial business, I needed to get more hens into my footprint while being conscious of stocking density, because stocking density is very important. So therefore, if I was to build a new system now, I would be using an aviary system. As to the type of system, but in your environment, perhaps a floor system, depending on the hen numbers, might be better because ventilation-wise, to keep hen movement, it can sometimes be easier to implement both together. As for manufacturers of equipment, I think there's so much out there. If I was to say which one I prefer as well, I would take a piece from that manufacturer, a piece from that one, a piece from that one, put it together and make my own. And regarding the feeding question, the last one, I think we have to look, hopefully soon, with travel restrictions, I can come over and we can do this on a face-to-face basis. It's always easier because we have to look at your feed composition, your feed quality. So to say, okay, we can use 3 feeds and 4 feeds is very difficult. When it's a hot environment, logically, we need to look at the energy density of that ration, and when we feed them in the feeding pattern. So you would use more, I would design a feed pattern to feed more in the evening, and maybe sometimes we need to use a midnight feeding as well in those conditions. But for me, always starting with fewer feeds and building up is better, because when I have more feeds, I don't want to take feed away.
Okay. There are lots of questions coming in. But we will be extending 15 minutes for Q&A. In areas with avian influenza threat, how can we ensure that the free-range activity areas are safe from wild birds, as these are open spaces?
Yeah, I would say quite impossible, being honest. And I always like to be honest. We went through this in the United Kingdom, and I had a big argument at the time. I was running lots of farms businesses, and I was offered basically, let's put netting over the whole range area. Well, that's not going to stop droppings. On the other hand, the welfare were telling me to put water sources for my chickens on the range. Well, that would encourage other birds in there. It's impossible. So what we need to focus on is what we can control, and that is the level of biosecurity we have. So we need to make sure for security, we only let people on site that we need to be on site. We have lots of changing of clothes. Unfortunately, I was going to show a video, but it didn't work, where we change clothes, showers if possible, and different footwear from each section in there. And what we're doing now, because at the moment in the UK, we're allowed by derogation because we have cases of AI. So we have housing orders for the hens. So now we're keeping them inside for a set period, and they can still maintain their free range status for this period. But then we have to manage these hens because, again, we've taken a hen from outside, put it inside. So we need to make sure we're focusing on the management of the enrichment inside.
Okay. I think we can only accept one more question. Considering the extra need of land and workforce for cage-free production, how do we maintain low and affordable egg price?
That is always going to be my advice for everything is, and when I was a consultant, what I used to do is go out, and in my head, I used to think every cost, I break it down to every penny. So I knew exactly what that was costing me per bird on there. So I could do away with things that were basically costing me money I didn't need, because we tend to go too far. We think we need more labor than we do for systems. I'm working on one, I won't say where, and they have 20 members of staff. And if that was one of my farms, I do that with 3 members, because with basically we have routines, we have processes like this. We can tighten and control it. So we have to, the monitoring program is vital, and a close eye on expenditure. We work on, in the UK, like we said before, where we're free range. Basically, our egg price is like this, it's a commodity, and our production prices are higher than we can sell them for at the moment. So we have to focus on the finances, and we can break it down. So watch the pennies, as we say, and just focus on that. And you will make a profit and market those eggs correctly. This is what you need to do. You need to market those eggs.
Okay. So I think, thank you so much to all attendees for your questions. We will answer your questions later as due to time constraints. Yeah. With that, I think we can wrap up the presentation. Thank you so much, Mark, for your fun and interactive session with us to give us a good head start on this production system. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Bye.